I grew up in a household with a father who played the guitar and sometimes the banjo and also the harmonica, and there was this funny little instrument, the auto harp, hanging around. He played in a bluegrass band, and there was always music playing in the house, except when there was football playing. I grew up in a household where there were band rehearsals and trips to the bar and to hear the band play. I grew up in a household also with a father who was an actor, and so after school for a while when I was little was being taken to the theater so I could play in the shop prop room, or when I got old enough to read, held book on shows. There's a well-told story that I've told here once before too of a family trip to Yellowstone after my dad finished a run of a play. It was a long drive, and when we finally arrived and there was the sign for the park, he said, "This is it." And from the back of the car, someone said, "This is what?" It was the second line of the show. My dad wondered about and said, "This is where they play the play, Horatio." And the fourth line of the show played out the entire first act of J.B. by Archibald MacLeish. Oh, to have that gray matter again. Theater was part of what we did as a family. To this day, I have never walked out of a play or a musical. I even like bad theater. There is something about what happens in a dark room as we run life through some creative process and see what rises to the top or sticks to our ribs or haunts us that I love, even if I forget to go as often as I should. I grew up in a house where my parents, but especially my mother, loved to take me to museums. And when I was 12, we went to visit her family in the Netherlands, and her best friend from college who had moved to London, and we went to museums. It's still our go-to act together. And she pointed out the absurdity of Bruegel's vision or the horror of his vision of hell and the delicacy of Rembrandt and light. And I learned over the course of that trip how to understand my Dutch heritage by the paintings we saw, and the landscapes and the clothing and the scenes that played out. I failed miserably as a child at jazz and ballet, but in high school it was going to the dance clubs with my sorry fake ID that worked, and getting lost in the songs and hurrying home before curfew that saved me. It unleashed was an outlet for all the stress I felt, a place where no one watched me, no one cared, and I could get lost with everyone else in the same song and the same bliss of being in a room, alive, dancing. I hadn't really thought about it until I was working on this sermon that music and theater and art and even dance have always been a part of my life. I think for all of us, they are a part of our life, especially part of our childhood. We didn't always get the most fabulous introduction to the arts, the plastic recorder in middle school, the glockenspiel, the Virginia reel, some elementary school choir singing "We Are the World," art classes with those clay pinch pots or tempura paints, and magazine collages. Come on, right? Been there? But when we were kids, art was part of the accepted curriculum of life, at least for us. My husband says, and I've shared with some of you before, that growing up has been learning that everything he was taught was wrong, that women can bear more pain, physical pain, than men, that the savages were not the native peoples on this land, but those who slaughtered them or tried, that the British are not refined, but ruthless thieves. You get the idea. Sorry, Emma. We love some of our ruthless thieves. And among those untruths, that the arts are not superfluous, not hobbies, that they are essential. In some places, they are more essential. After college and before going to divinity school, I was so convinced that once I was a minister, I could never travel again because I would forever be surviving on chickens and donated garden harvests from my parishioners, that I saved up some money from working and talked a friend into a 3-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. As part of that, we visited Bali, where a friend of the family was living and teaching and helped us get situated in the small village of Ubud in the center. It's famous as a kind of center, a village that's centered in the arts. But really all of Bali had the arts woven into the culture. Each village, as I recall, had a dance it was famous for. And of course, there were other things, styles of textiles and paintings and wood carving and sculpture. It was a world, it felt to me, where art was woven into community life. Even the morning offering that was laid on the steps of each house were works of art, flowers and fruit laid out beautifully on a fresh green banana leaf. And I remember wondering at one shared dance performance sitting there as different village communities performed, what it would be like to grow up in a place where your community all learned and practiced a particular dance, and the community center was built large enough to practice. And the dances were extraordinary, the lagong, the kechak. Sometimes we can talk about the arts like it's escape or entertainment. But we know it's much, much more than that. Dance legend Judith Jameson said, quote, "Dance can elevate our human experience beyond words." Activist and artist Richard Kamler said, "Art is our one true global language. It speaks to our need to reveal, to heal, to transform. It transcends our ordinary lives and lets us imagine what's possible." I've been reading a book, a bestseller called Your Brain on the Arts. Anybody read it or dabbled in it? It's about how the brain, in part, large part, how the brain is affected where and in what ways by dance and music and visual input like color and texture. Did you know whole departments are being started, cross-disciplinary, across the country and around the world, in reputable institutions, because it turns out the arts have an extraordinary impact and effect on us, a kind that the Academy is no longer ignoring. Anjan Chatterjee, a professor of neurology, psychology, and architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, started the Penn Center of Neuroaesthetics. Chatterjee says, quote, "When we're talking about pleasure preferences, we are activating our general reward system, which is also used for very basic things like food and sex. The pleasure we get out of art when we think the art is beautiful offers the same basic response. In other words, you and I, we're wired to need and love art like food and sex, to respond the same way. Why? It does all sorts of things, it turns out. A story and the listener, the storyteller and the listener, can, in the telling of a story, have the same parts of their brains lit up. An experience called mirroring that connects folks in fact and imagery and emotion and meaning. Authors Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, who are the authors of this book, The Brain on the Arts, show evidence that engaging in an art project, perhaps coloring your order of service, for as little as 45 minutes, even if you stink at it, lowers your stress hormone levels of cortisol And engaging in just one art experience a month can add 10 years to your life. The arts, the making, the looking, the participating, the watching light up our pleasure centers, make us more altruistic and generous. Experiences of chronic pain are reduced by the sounds, certain notes of sound, the G of this gong being one of them. Certain art therapy works better on postpartum depression or as well as some drugs. The World Health Organization has this definition of mental health. It says it's a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And art, they agree, is contributing to this full, essential mental health. With so much working against our connections, and in a world where meaning-making seems sometimes to change with every news cycle or get eroded, this connection and meaning-making is essential. James Baldwin wrote that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. I was thinking about how that one piece of meaning-making and connecting of us to lay bare together the questions that have been hidden by the answers is so perfectly illustrated by the work of Amy Sherrill that we talked about this morning. Here's this woman who is showing us what's missing, right? What question lies in the answer that we've been given. The Black farmer in his overalls on his shiny John Deere tractor, he challenges and breaks open our notion of a nation and who is a farmer and who is the backbone of our agricultural world, who feeds us. And the Black man poised so fashionably on that steel beam that's part of a building being built, challenges and remakes the narrative of who is part of the creation of modern America. It's skyscrapers, it's soaring monuments to power. And the soldier, joyous and young and strong and luminous, and in a moment of celebration, dipping another young, luminous man, shows us what's missing, challenging and remaking who can be soldiers and what their public celebrations can look like and who they can love. And it's there in the image of the Black First Lady, Michelle Obama, too. All of these artistic images, some more real, some more staged than others, but all realities of the world that we want to make the narrative we tell vivid, concrete, and memorable and pressed into us to change our sense of the nation. And in so doing, her work, the way she does, Amy Sherrill raises the question of who is still left out, who is not in our images. I don't think any of us will look at an iconic American image and not ask, who's not in this image? Who does it not represent in this question of making room, the inclusiveness that we speak of, but don't always find ways to celebrate or name? Sherrill answers the line from poet Marge Piercy that we opened with today, asking us to act by saying we and knowing who we mean, and each day meaning one more. Poetry, art, music, movement. It connects us, it reduces our pain, It brings us back into our bodies. It reminds us of our full humanity. It connects us to narratives of joy and meaning and upheaval and possibility. So knitters out there, hear this as a call to keep knitting, and painters to keep painting, and dancers dance wherever you can, and singers sing, and doodlers doodle, and actors make theater. You can do monologues in the shower too. It's not only the singers who can do their private performances there. And writers write. And let's put ourselves, even more than we have perhaps, in the galleries and the dance clubs and the theaters and the karaoke halls, wherever all of this is happening, to do it where we can, to increase our longevity, quiet our nervous systems, and imagine possibilities in the ways we were wired to feel and do all of those things. To make them, in other words, one of our spiritual practices. I really have this deep belief that images can change the world, writes Amy Sherald. May all of the arts work all of their magic on all of us. Amen.